Going on 13 years old, the first time I took a life. It's just one day, got invited to Mexico.
The Mexican cartels are infamous for their iron grip on power and unmatched brutality. Yet 2 Hells Angels bikers boldly entered their territory, sparking a clash that few would dare provoke, and the consequences were dire. Join us as we dive into what happened when the Hells Angels faced off with the Mexican cartels. A clash of criminal titans, the Hells Angels and the Mexican cartels. In the shadowy realm of organized crime, 2 formidable forces have long vied for power and influence: the Hells Angels and the Mexican cartels. The Hells Angels, with their iconic leather jackets and roaring motorcycles, built their empire on calculated intimidation and strict hierarchy. But even these hardened bikers tread carefully when dealing with Mexican cartels. Where the Angels prefer strategic shows of force, the cartels operate with a level of brutality that shocks even the most seasoned criminals. The clash between these titans has transformed North America's underworld into a powder keg, where old-school muscle meets cartel brutality. While the Hells Angels maintain their sophistication and presence across 56 countries, they've learned a harsh lesson. Traditional intimidation tactics mean little to organizations that turn cities into war zones. The cartel's vast armies of ex-military personnel, including both Mexican special forces and American veterans lured by lucrative contracts and lavish lifestyles, equipped with everything from machine guns, combat drones to anti-aircraft guns, have transformed Mexico's underworld into something unprecedented. What makes this partnership particularly volatile is its fundamental contradiction. The Hells Angels, despite their fearsome reputation, prefer to operate in the shadows, avoiding unnecessary violence that attracts law enforcement. The cartels, however, have no such reservations. Their billions in annual profits fund not just operations, but shocking displays of force that make even battle-hardened bikers uneasy. When business disagreements arise between these organizations, it's rarely the Angels who dictate terms. The cartel's willingness to deploy overwhelming force, combined with their indifference to civilian casualties, has established a new hierarchy in the criminal underworld, one where even the most notorious biker gang must carefully consider its moves. A brutal end in paradise, the murders of Kendall and Ivan. This deadly dance between cartels and bikers isn't theoretical, it's written in blood. In 2009, the tourist paradise of Puerto Vallarta became a killing ground, demonstrating exactly how the cartels handle business disagreements. 2 Canadian men, Gordon Douglas Kendall and Jeffrey Ronald Ivan, were enjoying the city's vibrant nightlife when their evening turned into a brutal display of cartel justice. Outside their shared condo in the tourist district, the sound of gunfire shattered the peaceful September night. Witnesses reported seeing a lone gunman approach the men as they were enjoying a night out on the town. Without warning, the assailant opened fire, striking Kendall multiple times and sending him crumpling to the ground. Ivan, in a desperate attempt to escape, fled towards the pool area of the condo complex, but the gunman gave chase, firing at him as he ran. As Ivan lay bleeding on the ground, 2 more assailants arrived on the scene, their weapons drawn. In a chilling display of ruthlessness, they stood over the wounded men and fired round after round into their bodies, ensuring that there would be no chance of survival. The sound of gunshots echoed through the night, sending tourists and locals alike running for cover. When the dust settled, Kendall and Ivan were found lying in pools of their own blood, their bodies riddled with bullets. The attackers had fled the scene, leaving behind a grisly tableau that would haunt the memories of all who witnessed it. As the investigation into the murders began, it quickly became clear that Kendall and Ivan were no ordinary tourists. Both men were members of the Hells Angels motorcycle club. The news of their deaths sent shockwaves through the biker community, as well as law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border. The brutality of the attack, as well as the brazenness of the killers, led many to speculate that the murders were connected to the ongoing turf wars between the Hells Angels and the Mexican cartels. The 2 organizations had a long-standing rivalry, with each seeking to control the lucrative drug trade that flowed across the border, playing with fire, the dangerous game of intermediaries. Kendall and Ivan's execution wasn't personal, it was business. And in the murky world of drug trafficking, No business is more dangerous than being the middleman between titans. These intermediaries operate in shadows within shadows, arranging meetings in anonymous hotel rooms, conducting deals through encrypted phones, and managing the complex dance of moving product and money between groups that often barely trust each other. They're the ones who handle the dangerous face-to-face negotiations, translate between different criminal cultures, and most importantly, take the fall when things go wrong. Gordon Douglas Kendall and Jeffrey Ronald Ivan played this high-stakes role until their lives ended in a hail of cartel gunfire. The position of intermediary requires a unique skill set. Enough street credibility to command respect, strong negotiation skills to broker deals, and most crucially, the ability to stay calm when tensions escalate. These middlemen must also master the intricate protocols of different criminal organizations, knowing when to show deference to a cartel leader while maintaining the proud bearing expected of a Hell's Angel, understanding which topics are off-limits, and recognizing the subtle signs that a deal is about to go bad. The aftermath investigation revealed a complex web of relationships and transactions. Kendall and Ivan had been operating in this perilous middle ground between organizations for nearly 3 years, facilitating not just drug deals, but also coordinating transport routes, arranging protection payments, and managing the delicate relationships between various criminal factions. Their phones, recovered from the scene, contained encrypted messages suggesting they were involved in negotiations for a substantial cocaine shipment worth an estimated $30 million. For the Hells Angels, this intermediary system represented a carefully calculated risk. The club maintained several layers of separation between their leadership and cartel operations, using a network of trusted members like Kendall and Ivan, who operated with limited information about the broader organization. These intermediaries would meet in neutral locations, usually tourist spots like Puerto Vallarta, Cancun, or Acapulco, where their presence wouldn't attract undue attention. However, this buffer strategy placed enormous pressure on the intermediaries. They had to maintain a perfect balance, appearing strong enough to command respect from the cartels while remaining humble enough not to offend their volatile business partners. They carried burner phones with specific contacts, memorized code words, and followed elaborate security protocols. One wrong word, one misinterpreted gesture could spiral into violence. The cartels approached these relationships with cold pragmatism. Their intermediaries were expected to follow an unwritten code: never negotiate established prices, never question delivery methods, and never, under any circumstances, attempt to play different cartel factions against each other. Territory disputes between cartels made this especially dangerous. An intermediary could find himself marked for death simply for unknowingly dealing with a rival faction. Before their deaths, Kendall and Ivan had reportedly expressed concerns about changing dynamics in their operational area. They had noticed increased surveillance, new faces at routine meetings, and subtle shifts in their cartel contacts' behavior. However, the Hells Angels' structured hierarchy meant they couldn't simply walk away from their responsibilities without facing consequences from their own organization. Unanswered Questions: the enduring mystery of Kendall and Ivan's deaths. While their bodies were discovered quickly, the truth behind their murders remains buried in time. Years have passed since that brutal night in Puerto Vallarta, yet the case stands as a ghost story in criminal history. Despite the best efforts of investigators on both sides of the border, the identity of their killers remains unknown, and the motive behind the savage attack is still a matter of speculation. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, authorities scrambled to piece together the events that led to the deaths of the 2 Canadian Hells Angels. Witnesses were interviewed, evidence was gathered, and leads were pursued. But the investigation quickly hit a wall. The killers, it seemed, had vanished into the night, leaving behind no trace of their identities or their connections to the Mexican cartels. One of the most puzzling aspects of the case was the apparent lack of a direct link between Kendall and Ivan's deaths and any specific drug cartel. While it was widely believed that the 2 men had been operating as intermediaries between the Hells Angels and the cartels, investigators were unable to definitively tie their murders to a particular criminal organization. This lack of a clear motive only deepened the mystery surrounding the case. Were Kendall and Ivan killed as part of a turf war between rival cartels? Had they somehow run afoul of their criminal associates, perhaps by skimming profits or failing to deliver on a promised shipment of drugs? Or was there some other, more sinister reason behind their brutal executions? Adding to the intrigue was the fact that Ivan was found armed at the time of the murders. The presence of a gun raised questions about the nature of the men's involvement with the cartels and whether they had been expecting trouble. Had they been caught up in something even more dangerous than a simple drug deal gone wrong? As the years have passed, the trail has grown cold, and the chances of solving the case have diminished. The families of Kendall and Ivan are left to grapple with the painful reality that they may never know the full truth behind their loved ones' deaths. The murders lay bare the brutal realities of the drug trade and expose the dangers faced by those who dare to navigate the treacherous waters between the Hells Angels and the Mexican cartels. A highway to hell, the Hells Angels and the drug trade. Their deaths marked a turning point, but not an ending. For the Hells Angels, business continued as usual, and business was booming. They'd built something far too valuable to let two murders derail their empire. With chapters spanning the globe, this notorious motorcycle club has built a reputation as one of the most powerful and influential criminal organizations in history. At the heart of the Hells Angels' drug trafficking operations lies a complex network of alliances and partnerships with other criminal groups. Perhaps none is more significant than their relationship with the Sinaloa cartel, one of the largest and most powerful drug trafficking organizations in the world. The Sinaloa cartel, based in Mexico, is responsible for the production and distribution of vast quantities of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana. With a vast network of smuggling routes and a willingness to use violence to protect their interests, the cartel has become a major force in the global drug trade. For the Hells Angels, partnering with the Sinaloa cartel has allowed them to tap into a steady stream of high-quality drugs that they can distribute throughout their network. The club's presence in Canada, particularly in the province of Ontario, has made them a key player in the drug trade. Ontario, with its proximity to the United States border and its well-developed highway network, has become a major hub for drug trafficking. The Hells Angels have taken advantage of this strategic location, using it as a base of operations for their smuggling activities. From their strongholds in cities like Toronto and Ottawa, the Hells Angels have been able to move large quantities of drugs across the border and into the United States. They have also used their connections in the trucking industry to transport drugs across the country, hiding them in the midst of legitimate cargo. The scale of the Hells Angels' drug trafficking operations is staggering. According to law enforcement estimates, the club is responsible for smuggling millions of dollars worth of drugs into Canada every year. They have also been linked to drug trafficking operations in Europe, Australia, and other parts of the world. But the Hells Angels' involvement in the drug trade is not without its risks. The club has found itself in the crosshairs of law enforcement agencies around the world, who have made it a top priority to disrupt their operations and bring their members to justice. In recent years, the Hells Angels have faced a series of high-profile busts and investigations that have put a dent in their drug trafficking activities. In 2019, police in Ontario arrested 28 people and seized millions of dollars worth of drugs, weapons, and cash as part of a major investigation into the club's activities. The King of Pot, Jimmy Cournoyer's reign of terror. But to truly understand how the Hells Angels transformed from bikers to international drug lords, you need to know about Jimmy Cournoyer. In the early hours of a crisp autumn morning, his empire began to crumble as a convoy of heavily armed police officers descended upon a sprawling mansion in the heart of Montreal. Their target, the man known in the underworld as the King of Pot. Cournoyer, a French-Canadian native, had built a vast and lucrative empire on the backs of the illegal drug trade. His network of grow houses, smuggling routes, and distribution channels stretched across the globe, from the lush forests of Quebec to the sun-drenched beaches of Mexico. At the heart of Cournoyer's empire was his strategic alliance with the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. This partnership would prove to be a pivotal moment for both parties, dramatically increasing the Hells Angels' profile in international drug trafficking. The Motorcycle Club had already been under law enforcement scrutiny, but their connection to Cournoyer's sophisticated operation put them squarely in the crosshairs of multiple agencies, including the DEA, FBI, and Interpol. The Hells Angels provided Cournoyer with more than just muscle. They offered a sophisticated distribution network that spanned across North America. Their involvement helped transform what might have been a regional operation into an international powerhouse. This partnership marked a significant evolution in the Hells Angels' operations, elevating them from their traditional motorcycle club roots to key players in a global drug trafficking syndicate. As Cournoyer expanded into other areas of the drug trade, forging alliances with the Sinaloa Cartel and the Rizzuto crime family, the Hells Angels' role grew increasingly prominent. Law enforcement agencies began documenting unprecedented levels of cooperation between these traditionally separate criminal enterprises, with the Hells Angels serving as crucial intermediaries. The Rizzuto family, with their control over the port of Montreal, a network of corrupt officials, complemented the Hells Angels' continental distribution capabilities. This three-way partnership created a virtually unstoppable trafficking operation that would take years for law enforcement to penetrate. The investigation into Cournoyer's empire led to intensified surveillance of Hells Angels chapters across North America. Police departments and federal agencies began sharing intelligence about the motorcycle club's activities like never before, leading to numerous high-profile arrests and chapter clubhouse raids. When the DEA finally caught up with Cournoyer in 2012, extraditing him to New York, the subsequent trial exposed the intricate relationships between these criminal organizations. Prosecutors meticulously detailed how the Hells Angels had evolved from a motorcycle club into sophisticated partners in a billion-dollar criminal enterprise. The trial testimony would later be used to support dozens of investigations into Hells Angels chapters across North America. Cournoyer's eventual 27-year sentence marked not only his own downfall, but also triggered a cascade of law enforcement actions against his criminal partners. The Hells Angels, in particular, found themselves facing unprecedented heat from law enforcement, with their connection to Cournoyer's empire providing authorities with new legal tools and strategies to target their operations. Inside the belly of the beast, ATFs Daring infiltration of the Hells Angels. If Cournoyer's case exposed the Hells Angels' criminal sophistication, what happened in Arizona revealed their greatest weakness. In the heart of the desert, one undercover agent would prove that even the most feared motorcycle club had blind spots. Under an endless blue sky, amid vast expanses of sand and scrub, Operation Black Biscuit, one of the most audacious undercover operations in American law enforcement history, was about to unfold. The year was 2002, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms ATF had set its sights on the Hells Angels, the notorious motorcycle club with a long history of involvement in criminal activity. For years, the club had operated with impunity, using its fearsome reputation and its network of contacts to build a vast empire of drugs, weapons, and violence. Operation Black Biscuit would become the ATF's most ambitious attempt to infiltrate the Hells Angels. At its heart was a daring plan, sending one of their own, Jay Dobbins, deep undercover into the club's Arizona chapter. The mission would require not just courage, but an ability to completely immerse himself in the biker culture, knowing that one wrong move could mean death. Dobbins, a former college football player with a square jaw and a military buzz cut, was an unlikely choice for such a dangerous assignment. But he had a rare combination of toughness, intelligence, and charisma that made him the perfect candidate for the job. His athletic background and natural intensity would prove invaluable in earning the bikers' respect. For nearly 2 years, Dobbins lived and breathed the life of a Hells Angel, immersing himself in the club's culture of violence and intimidation. He attended wild parties fueled by drugs and alcohol, participated in brutal fights and brawls, and even rode his motorcycle alongside some of the most notorious criminals in the country. The deeper he went, the more dangerous his position became. But all the while, Dobbins was gathering evidence, carefully documenting the club's criminal activities, and building a case that would eventually bring down some of its most powerful members. The operation required him to walk an impossibly fine line, being criminal enough to be believable, but not so criminal as to compromise his law enforcement principles. It was a dangerous game, one that required Dobbins to constantly be on his guard. The Hells Angels were a paranoid and suspicious bunch, always on the lookout for signs of betrayal or infiltration. One false move, one misstep, and Dobbins' cover could be blown, putting his life in jeopardy. The club's notorious practice of violently eliminating suspected informants hung over him like a constant shadow. But Dobbins was a master of his craft, able to blend in seamlessly with the rough-and-tumble world of the bikers. He adopted their language, their dress, and their mannerisms, becoming one of them in every way that mattered. His commitment to the role was total. He lived, ate, and breathed the biker lifestyle, knowing that any crack in his facade could be fatal. Over the course of his 2-year infiltration, Dobbins was able to gather a wealth of evidence against the Hells Angels, including detailed accounts of their drug trafficking and weapons smuggling operations. The intelligence he gathered provided law enforcement with unprecedented insight into the inner workings of the notorious motorcycle club. When Operation Black Biscuit finally culminated, the ATF was ready. In a series of coordinated raids across the country, they arrested dozens of high-ranking Hells Angels members, including the club's notorious leader, Ralph "Sonny" Barger. The operation had struck at the very heart of the organization, exposing its vulnerabilities and shattering its aura of invincibility. The arrests sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld, and the Hells Angels were left reeling. For the first time in their history, they had been outfoxed by the law, their carefully constructed empire of crime and violence crumbling around them. In 2009, Dobbins transformed his extraordinary experiences into the New York Times best-selling memoir, No Angel: My Harrowing Undercover Journey to the Inner Circle of the Hells Angels. The book offered readers an unprecedented look into not just the dangerous world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, but also the psychological toll of living a double life, the unholy alliance of El Chapo and the Hells Angels. While Dobbins witnessed the Hells Angels' domestic operations, their most dangerous evolution was happening far from Arizona's desert. Their partnership with El Chapo's empire would reveal just how far the motorcycle club had strayed from its outlaw roots. In the shadowy underworld of international drug trafficking, perhaps no alliance was stranger or more unsettling than the one that emerged between El Chapo's Sinaloa cartel and the Hells Angels, a partnership that would blur the lines between street gang and global crime syndicate. The story of this unholy alliance began to unfold in a courtroom in New York City, where El Chapo stood trial on charges of drug trafficking and money laundering. As the trial progressed, a series of shocking revelations emerged, painting a picture of a criminal underworld where the boundaries between nations and organizations meant nothing in the face of the endless demand for illegal drugs. One of the most explosive moments in the trial came when a government witness, a former associate of El Chapo's, named Stephen Tello, took the stand to testify about a meeting between the Sinaloa cartel and a group of Canadian Hells Angels. According to Tello, the purpose of the meeting was to arrange a hit on a rival drug dealer, a man who had crossed the cartel and needed to be eliminated. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom and beyond, as the idea of two of the world's most notorious criminal organizations working together to carry out a murder seemed almost too shocking to be true. But as more details emerged, it became clear that the alliance between the Sinaloa cartel and the Hells Angels was no mere fluke, but rather a carefully cultivated relationship that had been years in the making. For the Sinaloa cartel, the Hells Angels represented a valuable partner in the drug trade, a group with a proven track record of violence and a network of contacts that stretched across North America and beyond. With their help, the cartel could expand its operations into new territories, tapping into lucrative markets and eliminating rivals who stood in their way. For the Hells Angels, the partnership with the Sinaloa cartel offered a chance to boost their own criminal enterprises, providing access to a steady supply of high-quality drugs and a powerful ally in the underworld. It was a relationship that promised great rewards, but also great risks, as the bikers soon learned that crossing the cartel could have deadly consequences. As the trial of El Chapo unfolded, the true extent of his criminal empire began to come into focus. Here was a man who had built a vast network of corruption and violence that stretched from the streets of Mexico to the boardrooms of Wall Street. A man who had used his wealth and power to bend governments and armies to his will. The echoes of violence, the lasting impact of the cartel Hells Angels conflict. As El Chapo's empire was laid bare in a New York courtroom, the shadows of Kendall and Ivan's murders still haunted the Hells Angels. Their deaths had taught the motorcycle club a brutal lesson about cartel partnerships. The message was crystal clear: cross us at your own peril. Even as the Angels grappled with the loss of their own, they knew they couldn't afford to show weakness in the face of such a powerful and ruthless adversary. For the Hells Angels, the conflict with the cartels had always been a dangerous game, a high-stakes gamble that offered the promise of great rewards, but also carried the risk of terrible consequences. They had long relied on their reputation as one of the most fearsome and influential criminal organizations in the world to protect them from the worst of the cartel's violence. But now that reputation had been called into question. In the years that followed, the Hells Angels would find themselves increasingly drawn into the orbit of the Mexican cartels as they sought to maintain their position in the lucrative drug trade. They would forge new alliances and broker new deals, always careful to avoid the kind of direct confrontation that had cost Kendall and Ivan their lives. But even as they navigated this dangerous new landscape, the Hells Angels could not escape the long shadow cast by the cartels. In Canada and beyond, the specter of cartel violence loomed large, a constant reminder of the terrible price that could be paid for crossing the wrong people. The impact of this conflict would be felt far beyond the ranks of the Hells Angels. In Mexico, the cartel's iron grip on power would only tighten in the years that followed, as they continued to expand their operations and tighten their control over vast swathes of territory. Despite the best efforts of the Mexican government and international law enforcement agencies, the cartels would prove to be a seemingly indestructible force, their power and influence growing with each passing year. They would continue to corrupt politicians and police, infiltrate legitimate businesses and institutions, and spread fear and violence wherever they went. As the bodies piled up and the drugs continued to flow, it became increasingly clear that the conflict between the Hells Angels and the Mexican cartels was not just a story of two criminal organizations locked in a deadly struggle for power. It was a microcosm of a much larger battle, a struggle for the soul of a nation and a region that had been consumed by the drug trade. There is no clear victor in this war, no decisive battle that would determine the fate of Mexico and the criminal underworld that had taken root there. Instead, there would only be the echoes of violence, the endless cycle of death and destruction that had become the hallmark of the drug trade. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.